My family threw me a baby shower in the backyard. My mother held my baby and said, "You gave birth before your sister. You betrayed us." Then she threw my baby into the fire. My sister raised her glass and laughed. "You brought this on yourself," I screamed and ran forward. But what happened next shook me to my core. Clara Thompson sat on the edge of the hospital bed, cradling her frail newborn daughter, Lily, in her arms. The soft morning light streaming through the window illuminated the baby's tiny face. And Clara's heart was filled with love. This was the first time in her life she had felt unconditional love. She gently kissed Lily's soft cheek. "My little angel," Clara whispered. "I'll protect you no matter what." Lily gave a tiny yawn, and Clara smiled. Tomorrow, she would take her daughter back to her parents' home, and her mother, Evelyn, was planning to host a baby shower for her over the weekend. Just thinking about it made her stomach tighten. Her cell phone rang with Mother displayed on the screen. Clara took a deep breath before answering. "Hello, Mother, Clara. Everything is ready for tomorrow's pickup." Evelyn Thompson's voice always had a commanding tone. "Thomas will come to get you, and that child. I have to prepare for the baby shower. Thank you, Mother. But it's not that child. It's Lily." Clara gently corrected her. "Your first grandchild." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. "Yes, well," Evelyn's voice was cold. "Anyway, tomorrow at 10:00. Don't be late." After the call ended, Clara sighed. Her mother had never once congratulated her on Lily's birth. When Clara had announced her pregnancy, Evelyn's first words were, "Ladies have children after they're married." Words that had been repeated many times since. Clara gazed at a photo of her fiancé, Michael. He was currently working in Africa with Doctors Without Borders. When he heard the news of Lily's birth, Michael had reportedly shed tears of joy. However, he couldn't return home in the middle of his mission and wouldn't be able to attend the baby shower. "Daddy will come see you soon," Clara told Lily. "Daddy is a very kind and brave person. Do you know some people earn over $10.0 a month just by posting Reddit stories on YouTube? No face, no voice, just a laptop. I do it too. Link below if you're curious. He loves you so much." A nurse entered the room and began the final discharge check. "Is the father not here?" she asked kindly. "He's working overseas," Clara answered. "But my father will come pick us up tomorrow." "That's nice," the nurse smiled. "Grandpa must be thrilled." Clara managed a faint smile. Her father, Thomas, was indeed happy. When she showed him Lily's photo, tears had welled up in his eyes. But that was only when Evelyn wasn't around. Thomas Thompson was a reserved, gentle man. He was a history professor at a prestigious university in Virginia, beloved by his students. At home, however, he always yielded to Evelyn's strong will. Clara loved her father, but sometimes she was disappointed by his indecisiveness. If only Dad was stronger, Clara had thought countless times. He had silently accepted the fact that her sister, Sarah, was always their mother's favorite. Sarah. Clara felt complicated emotions rise within her at the thought of her sister's name. She always seemed smarter, more beautiful, and more successful than Clara, at least in Evelyn's eyes. Sarah was a successful lawyer with no children from her marriage to Daniel. When Clara announced her pregnancy, Sarah had offered her congratulations on the surface, but there was something cold in her eyes. Clara later learned that Sarah and Daniel had been undergoing fertility treatments. Clara didn't hate her sister. Rather, she wished to bridge the deep gap between them. She secretly hoped that Lily's birth might be that bridge. The next day, Thomas arrived as promised to pick up Clara and Lily. When he held his granddaughter, tears welled up in his eyes. "She's beautiful," Thomas said in an emotional voice. "She looks like you did as a baby." Clara gently squeezed her father's arm. "Thank you, Dad." In the car, Thomas occasionally glanced at Lily in the back seat through the rearview mirror. "Evelyn is very busy preparing for the baby shower," he said cheerfully. "It's going to be a wonderful party for you." Clara tried to smile but couldn't help feeling anxious. Her mother's perfect parties always made her uncomfortable. "Is Sarah coming?" she asked. "Oh, yes, of course," Thomas answered. His voice sounded a bit tense. "She and Daniel are looking forward to it." Clara confirmed that Lily was asleep and spoke in a low voice. "Dad, tell me honestly, does Mom really want to throw me a baby shower? Or is it just for appearances?" Thomas glanced briefly at Clara. There was sadness in his eyes. "Clara, your mother loves you in her own way. Try to understand." It was the usual answer. Clara silently nodded and looked out the window. Watching Virginia's beautiful countryside roll by, she thought about tomorrow's baby shower. The whole family would be there, relatives and friends too, and she would have to pretend to be part of a happy family. As the car turned into the long driveway of her parents' home, Clara's heartbeat quickened. The large colonial-style house with its white columns came into view, the house where she grew up, and now the place she was returning to with her daughter. "Here we are," Thomas said brightly. "Let's bring Lily home." Clara looked down at her baby and whispered softly, "It's okay, Lily. I'm here with you." On the morning of the baby shower, Clara woke up early. Evelyn's voice from the next room had her nerves on edge. Not blue tablecloths, pink ones. Evelyn was instructing someone. "My daughter had a girl. Get every detail perfect." Clara took a deep breath as she held Lily on the bed. Her mother was taking charge of everything without even asking what she wanted. The typical Evelyn Thompson show was beginning. "Good morning." Clara, turning around, she saw her father, Thomas, standing in the doorway. He smiled gently and came closer to look at Lily. "She's been in a good mood all morning," Clara said. "Dad, today..." "It'll be fine," Thomas interrupted her. "Today is a special day for you and Lily. Everything will work out." His words lacked confidence, but Clara gratefully squeezed her father's hand. At 2 p.m., guests began to arrive. Clara sat on the living room sofa, holding Lily. Her maternal aunts gathered around, peering at the baby and offering congratulations. But Clara could sense curiosity and a certain judgment in their eyes. They were probably internally criticizing her for having a child before marriage. "Clara, you look tired." Evelyn approached with a perfect hostess smile. She was wearing a pale blue dress and looked as elegant as always. "You should rest a bit. I'll hold Lily for you." Clara stared at her mother. Evelyn had never before asked to hold Lily. She hesitated, but, feeling the eyes of the relatives around her, reluctantly handed Lily to her mother. Evelyn awkwardly held her granddaughter and, maintaining her smile, walked across the living room. Clara watched with bated breath. Clara, turning around, she saw her sister, Sarah, entering the room with her husband, Daniel. Sarah was, as always, perfectly polished. She was dressed in a Dior dress with a pearl necklace gleaming at her throat. "Sarah." Clara stood up to greet her sister. They exchanged a formal hug. The strong scent of Sarah's perfume stung Clara's nose. "Congratulations," Sarah said with a smile. Her eyes weren't smiling. "So, you've discovered your maternal instincts." "Thank you," Clara replied. "Mom is holding Lily." Sarah's expression clouded for a moment. She turned to look at her mother holding Lily. "Well, I never imagined Mom becoming a grandmother," she said in a sarcastic tone, "especially with you becoming a mother first." Clara caught her breath. Sarah's words were clearly filled with envy and resentment. She knew her sister was suffering from not being able to have children, but she hadn't expected such comments on this day. "Sarah, please," Clara said quietly. "Let's not have any disputes today." Sarah gave Clara a cold look. "Of course, today is your special day, after all." The party progressed, and Clara kept her eyes on her mother and Lily while conversing with guests. Evelyn continued holding her granddaughter while skillfully mingling with the guests. However, when Lily began to cry, she quickly handed the baby to a nearby relative. "Time to open presents," Evelyn announced grandly. Clara was led to a large table set up in the backyard. A mountain of presents was piled there. She took Lily back in her arms and began opening the gifts one by one, surrounded by guests. "This is from Sarah and Daniel." Evelyn handed her a box. Clara opened it and pulled out a set of high-end brand baby clothes. "These are lovely. Thank you. I picked them out with Mom." Sarah smiled. "I thought you wouldn't be able to choose things worthy of Lily with your taste." Clara's cheeks grew hot. Laughter erupted from the crowd. "Clara never had any fashion sense, even as a student," Evelyn said cheerfully. "Remember what she wore to her high school graduation? That was awful." Clara forced herself to smile. Her mother always enjoyed humiliating her in public. "That's right," Sarah joined in. "I had to rescue her that time. But now, I'll use my taste to rescue Lily." More laughter followed, and Clara hugged Lily closer. "Everyone, let's move to the backyard," Evelyn proclaimed, raising her glass. "Our family has a special tradition." We gather around a bonfire to celebrate the birth of a new life. Clara looked at her mother in surprise. She had never heard of such a tradition in her family. Mum, there's no such tradition. Of course there is. Evelyn interrupted with a smile. Her eyes gleamed coldly. Have you forgotten? Our ancestors believed that fire wards off evil spirits. But Lily is still so small. And it's fine, Clara said. Clara, Evelyn said firmly. Everyone is looking forward to it. You always disregard family traditions, but just cooperate today. Clara looked for Thomas, but he was deep in conversation with relatives in a corner of the garden. She took a deep breath and gave up arguing. All right, she said quietly. The guests began moving to the backyard. Clara, holding Lily, followed at the back of the group. Dusk was approaching, and the sky was beginning to turn purple. The bonfire preparations were already complete in the backyard. Evelyn placed a hand on Clara's shoulder. Come on, don't keep everyone waiting, she whispered. Tonight is a special night for you and your daughter. Most of the guests had already gathered around the fire pit, set up in the backyard. The sky was bathed in the soft purple of twilight, and the silhouettes of pine trees lining the garden stood out. At Evelyn's direction, a house servant lit the bonfire, and orange flames rose silently. Clara held Lily close to her chest, maintaining a safe distance from the fire. Lily was wrapped in a small blanket, showing a peaceful, sleeping face. Clara tried to hide her anxiety, but couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Everyone, gather around. Evelyn raised her glass high, illuminated by the light of the bonfire. Today is a special day. A new life has joined our family. Relatives and friends applauded with smiles. Clara returned their smiles awkwardly. The Thompson family has an ancient tradition, Evelyn continued. When welcoming a new family member, we borrow the purifying power of fire to bless the baby. Clara frowned. She had never heard of such a tradition. Looking over, she saw that her father, Thomas, also wore a confused expression. Now, I want to teach Clara her first lesson in parenting, Evelyn said with a smile. That a mother's duty sometimes involves pain. A sense of confusion spread among the guests. Evelyn ignored it and approached Clara. Now, let me see Lily. Evelyn reached out her hands. Let Grandma hold her. Clara instinctively stepped back. Mum, she's sleeping. I think it's better not to wake her. Clara. Evelyn's voice had a steely coldness. Are you defying me in front of everyone? Clara felt the eyes of all the guests on her. Feeling uncomfortable and pressured socially, she reluctantly handed Lily to her mother. Evelyn took Lily and, for the first time, seriously looked at her granddaughter's face. Something in her expression changed. The rigid smile disappeared, replaced by something else. She's a pretty child, Evelyn said quietly. Suddenly, her gaze turned to Clara. Her eyes were cold and filled with hatred. Having a baby before your sister. You're a traitor. Clara caught her breath. What are you saying? Be quiet. Evelyn's voice rang sharply. You've disrupted the family order. The guests were confused and began to quietly back away. No one had the courage to intervene in this strange turn of events. Mum decided that I would have a child first. Turning around, Clara saw Sarah standing on the opposite side of the bonfire, wineglass in hand. Her face was illuminated by the flames, creating strange shadows. It's a family tradition, Sarah continued. The second daughter should have children before the firstborn. That's what Mum said. Clara stared at her sister in disbelief. What are you talking about? There's no such tradition. There is. Evelyn's voice trembled with anger. My mother was a second daughter, and so was I. Even after marrying into the Thompson family, the tradition should have been preserved. Clara turned to her father. Dad. Thomas stepped forward with a confused expression. Evelyn, what are you saying? There's no such tradition. Be quiet. Evelyn glared at her husband. This has nothing to do with you. Evelyn's expression twisted, and she looked down at Lily. I can't accept this child. Clara's blood ran cold at those words. Mum, give Lily back to me, she pleaded. But Evelyn pretended not to hear and slowly moved closer to the bonfire. A child who breaks tradition needs purification. Mum, Clara cried out. Stop. What are you doing? Evelyn's movements quickened. Holding Lily, she walked toward the bonfire, muttering, bad blood must be cleansed. After a moment of frozen terror, Clara came to her senses and ran toward her mother. Stop, give Lily back. But it was too late. Evelyn suddenly thrust Lily, wrapped in the blanket, forward and threw her toward the bonfire. "Fire baptism for one with impure blood," Evelyn shouted. Clara's scream pierced the night sky. She lunged forward, trying to save her daughter. Sarah raised her wine glass and laughed coldly. "Isn't this what you deserve?" In the midst of the confusion, everyone was frozen, but it was Thomas who moved with unexpected swiftness. He leaped toward the bonfire with incredible speed, catching the small bundle of Lily in midair. His right arm touched the flames, and the sleeve of his shirt caught fire. "Thomas!" someone shouted. Her father rolled on the ground, protecting Lily with his body while extinguishing the fire on his arm. Clara rushed to her father's side. "Lily, Dad!" Thomas, despite his pained expression, handed the small bundle to Clara. "It's okay. She's safe." Clara took Lily with trembling hands and pulled back the blanket. Lily was still asleep, unharmed. The thick fabric of the blanket had protected her. Clara shed tears of relief. However, that relief was short-lived. Turning around, she saw Evelyn standing in shock. Understanding of what she had done was gradually dawning on her face. Evelyn stammered. "I was just the tradition." Sarah stood silently beside her mother, equally stunned. Her wine glass had fallen and shattered, with red wine spreading across the ground. Clara hugged Lily tightly and looked at her father. Thomas had red burn marks on his arm and was clearly in pain, but in his eyes burned something she had never seen before. It was anger, pure, uncontainable anger. He slowly stood up and, after confirming Lily's safety, turned to face Evelyn. "Clara," he commanded in a low voice, "go inside. Take Lily to safety." Clara was surprised by her father's tone. The gentle, mild-mannered father she knew was gone, replaced by someone else entirely. "But Dad, your arm, now." Thomas's voice allowed no further discussion. Clara held Lily tightly to her chest and hurried toward the house. Behind her, she heard her father's voice. "For 40 years, I've kept silent, but now it's over." Clara ran into the house, protectively cradling Lily. Looking out the living room window, she could see her father walking toward Evelyn and Sarah. His posture was filled with dignity, and his anger seemed to spread throughout the garden. The guests, in fear and confusion, began to hurriedly leave. Clara stood by the window and sank to her knees, trembling. Lily showed a miraculously peaceful sleeping face in her arms. Clara was watching the garden from the living room window. Lily slept peacefully in her arms, but her own heart was beating wildly. Outside the window was a version of her father she had never seen before. Thomas Thompson, illuminated by the flames, had transformed from the gentle history professor into a warrior trembling with rage. Evelyn and Sarah stood by the bonfire. Mother and daughter's expressions gradually showed horror and understanding of what they had done. Evelyn covered her mouth with her hand, while Sarah stared at the broken glass at her feet. 40 years. Thomas's voice was low, but resonated throughout the garden. "For 40 years, I've silently witnessed your violence and control." He took a step toward Evelyn. His right arm bore the red mark of a burn, and his shirt sleeve was scorched. "Thomas, you don't understand," Evelyn said with a trembling voice. "I was only trying to preserve tradition. I didn't mean to hurt Lily. Don't lie." Thomas's angry shout made the remaining guests back away in fear. "You threw your own granddaughter into a bonfire. You call that tradition? I've researched your family's entire history. No such tradition exists." Sarah stood in her father's way. "Dad, calm down. Mom was just confused. You were complicit." Thomas looked at Sarah with stern eyes. "Always your mother's puppet. I've turned a blind eye to your cruelty toward Clara, but today, it ends." He grabbed Evelyn's arm. "Taste what you've done." "Thomas, what are you doing?" Evelyn's eyes widened in fear. He pushed her toward the bonfire. "You're the one who needs fire purification." Dad, stop!" Sarah screamed and lunged to help her mother. Evelyn stumbled and lost her balance. Sarah tried to support her, but both were too close to the bonfire. Suddenly, the hem of Evelyn's dress touched the flames and caught fire. "Help!" Evelyn screamed. Sarah also caught fire on her sleeve and screamed. Panicked, both desperately struggled to extinguish the flames. Clara was frozen, in terror. The scene she witnessed through the window was like a nightmare. Thomas stood stunned for a moment but quickly came to his senses and ran to the garden hose. He sprayed water on them, extinguishing the fire. Evelyn and Sarah collapsed to the ground, crying out. They had mild burns on their arms and legs. "Someone call an ambulance," Thomas shouted. One of the remaining guests took out a cell phone and began dialing 911. Clara left the living room on trembling legs and headed for the front yard. She held Lily to her chest, trying to keep her away from the chaotic scene. The sound of sirens could already be heard from the street. Minutes later, ambulances and police vehicles arrived one after another. Police officers began gathering information from confused witnesses. Paramedics treated Evelyn and Sarah's burns and placed them on stretchers. Turning around, Clara found her father standing beside her. His arm was wrapped in first aid gauze, and his face showed deep fatigue, but determination resided in his eyes. "Are you all right?" And Lily, "We're fine," Clara answered. "But Dad, your arm, don't worry." Thomas placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder. "For a long time, I was a coward. I let them hurt you. I'll never let that happen again." One of the paramedics approached Clara. "Ma'am, you and your baby should be checked at the hospital too, just to be safe." Clara nodded. She looked at Thomas. "Dad, come with us." "Of course," Thomas answered. "I'll go in another ambulance." A police officer approached them. "Can you tell us what happened?" "My wife and younger daughter," Thomas answered quietly, "tried to kill my granddaughter." The officer's expression tightened. "That's a serious accusation. Can you provide details?" "After we get to the hospital," Thomas said. "My daughter and granddaughter's safety comes first." The officer nodded and escorted them to an ambulance. Clara climbed into the ambulance, holding Lily close. Inside, a paramedic began carefully examining her and Lily. "Miss, your baby is fine," the paramedic reassured her. "It's truly a miracle." "A miracle," Clara murmured. She looked out the window. She could see Evelyn and Sarah being loaded into another ambulance. Anger and sadness mingled within her. Her mother and sister had tried to harm her child. She couldn't understand how such a thing was possible. Thomas sat beside her. "I'm going to tell the police everything about Evelyn's years of abuse and what happened today." Clara stared at her father. "Dad, why did you stay silent all these years?" Thomas heaved a deep sigh. His eyes reflected 40 years of pain and regret. Shamefully, "I feared her, and I loved her. It was blind love." He gazed tenderly at Lily. "But when I saw this child, everything changed. Now I have someone to protect. You and Lily." With sirens blaring, the ambulance sped toward the hospital. Clara gazed at Lily's tiny face and gently kissed her cheek. "It's okay," she whispered. "Dad and I are here for you." Stars shone quietly in the night sky, visible through the ambulance window. Clara knew that today's events had changed her life forever, but she also felt hope that this change might not necessarily be a bad thing. From the moment her father stood up for her and Lily, a new family had begun. Clara woke up in a small hospital waiting room. Lily was sleeping in a makeshift bed prepared by a nurse. Last night's events seemed like a nightmare, but her father's bandaged arm reminded her that it had all been real. The hospital room door opened, and 2 police officers entered. One was a female detective with kind eyes. "Miss Thompson, may we speak with you?" Clara nodded. As the female detective sat beside her, the other officer stood near the door. "You've been through a terrible experience," the detective said quietly. "Your father told us about the situation and about your family's complex history." Clara looked out the window. "I never imagined my family would come to this. Growing up in an abusive home is like sitting on a time bomb," the detective said. "Your mother and sister have been transferred to another hospital. They're both receiving treatment for their burns, but arrest warrants have been issued. What will they be charged with? Child endangerment, attempted murder, and domestic violence." The officer answered, "Your father's testimony will be crucial. He says he's going to reveal all the details of 40 years of abuse." Clara exhaled shakily. She felt a mixture of fear and relief that long-kept secrets would come to light. Has Michael been contacted? She suddenly remembered. Your father has already contacted him. He's returning on the next flight. The following 2 weeks felt like living someone else's life. Clara and her father stayed in a hotel, as their house was off limits due to the police investigation. Michael returned, and his calm presence soothed her heart. "I'll do anything for you and Lily," he promised. "From now on, we'll move forward together as a family." As trial preparations progressed, Clara decided, for the first time, to tell her story. With the help of a hospital counselor, she began preparing to take the stand and testify about the years of abuse and the recent horrific event. On the day of the preliminary hearing, Clara entered the courtroom on shaky legs. Michael and her father stood on either side of her. When Evelyn and Sarah were brought in, she caught her breath. Mother and sister had lost their former dignity, dressed in orange prison uniforms and handcuffed. Evelyn avoided making eye contact, but Sarah stared at her. In her eyes floated an emotion Clara had never seen before. It was remorse. Surprisingly, Sarah did not defend her mother. She admitted she had been controlled by her mother and said in a small voice to Clara, "I'm sorry." Evelyn tried to justify her actions until the end. "I was only trying to preserve tradition," she insisted, but the court handed down a severe sentence for their actions. 6 months later, Clara was living with her father in a new home. Lily was growing healthy, and her wedding to Michael was scheduled for the following week. Sarah was participating in community service and therapy in exchange for a reduced sentence. Gradually freed from her mother's influence, she was finding her true self again. "Are you going to visit her?" Michael asked Clara. He was referring to Sarah. Clara looked out at the spring landscape while holding Lily. "I will." She was a victim of mother too. That afternoon, Clara took Lily to visit the rehabilitation facility. Her reunion with Sarah began with tears and apologies and continued with quiet conversation. For the first time, the two sisters truly faced each other. "Real family isn't just about blood ties," Clara said. "It's about people who protect and love each other." Sarah timidly held Lily's tiny hand. Watching this scene, Clara felt hope for a new beginning.